Well, guys, I was told we are the warm-up act for Andrew Ng, so buckle up. Got a high bar. Thanks so much for joining me. It's a pleasure to get to talk to two friends and more importantly, two EdTech entrepreneurial titans. Sam, co-founder, CEO of ClassDojo, the connective tissue between kids, teachers, and families across the US and across the world, and Andrew Su, the CTO of Speak, a language learning app that teaches users through conversation and speech to reach fluency. So thank you both. This panel is called Masters of Scale, and so I want to give you a quick sense of scale for these two businesses. ClassDojo engages with 51 million students across 90% of US elementary schools and across 180 countries globally. And Speak has over 10 million downloads across the world, and in its first market of South Korea, over 10% of the entire country's population has used Speak to learn English. So it's quite an accomplishment to you both. I want to kick off and talk a little bit about your backgrounds prior to starting each of your businesses. Education is, of course, a core tenet to you both, and you both have very unique stories around education. So if you could talk to the audience a bit about your journey and how that ultimately led you to starting a company in EdTech. Sam, let's start with you.
Sure. Hey, everyone. So I actually it started quite early for me. I went to quite a weird school. So the school I went to in middle and high school insisted on kids teaching as well as learning. So I actually taught for probably about a third of my time as a teenager. I was an economist after that, and I thought I was going to be an academic. I thought I was going to do a PhD. The month before I started, one of my professors asked if I would help one of his friends with their school. And so I went to the school to go and teach for a little bit, and it turned into helping them with a whole bunch of stuff, helping turn the economics department around, the maths department around. And from there I went to McKinsey, helped build their education group in London, which was mostly figuring out what makes great public education systems really great around the world, in different countries around the world. And then I left and met my co-founder Liam, who's a genius. He was a video game developer. He built one of the world's biggest kids games, and he was doing a PhD in computer science, focused on helping kids learn. So we met, we got talking about some of the big ideas we could work on. And to me, one of the biggest ideas is how do you help the most number of people make the most of their talents and capacities? Because to me, that's like the engine for progress in the world. And so we got talking about that and how we could help with that, starting with younger kids. And that got us out to the Bay Area, and that's where Dojo kind of started.
That's great. And Andrew, talk a little bit about your journey as a student.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I've had a pretty unusual educational journey as a child. I was actually homeschooled from ages 8 through 12, and then it was a very accelerated path after that. I actually went to college when I was 12, and then grad school when I was 16. And then I dropped out of grad school to do the Teal Fellowship. That's how I got into startups. And I think I've just always, through that journey, had this very fundamental belief that there are some shortcuts in the universe. It is possible to learn things 10 times faster than what's possible. And I always felt like one day this would be scalable to many more people across the globe. And it's amazing because it feels like much of the technology is finally here. And that is kind of what Speak is ultimately working towards as well. So it's a very exciting moment in time.
And so Sam, I've known you for almost a decade, Andrew slightly less, but the two of you have me beat. And so as three San Franciscans in kind of a small EdTech universe, talk about how you two originally met and what that was like. Sam.
Right, so we got into this incubator called Imagine K-12, which is now part of Y Combinator. But we came out to the Bay Area. It was a summer program. I don't know if I should go on record saying this, but we were here on a 90-day tourist visa, and that's where we started the company. So it was a very accelerated timeline. We had to go from having landed in America, never having met anyone before, to ultimately raising a seed round for the company. But we were working furiously through this 90-day period, and we were in this building, 395 Page Mill Road, and they had some ping pong tables and all the usual trappings of a startup incubator building. And that's when we ran into each other, because you were running Airy Labs, right?
Yeah, so I had recently dropped out of grad school. All of my classmates, it was at Stanford, so startups were kind of in the air. All of my classmates were either leaving to start a startup or join a startup. So I got into StartX, which was the Stanford Startup Accelerator, and we happened to be working out of the same building. And I just remember one day meeting this very tall, very tan, hyper-competent founder. So yeah,
It wasn't
known
me.
each other for so long.
I'm like 80% sure 395 Page Mill Road was in Silicon Valley, the HBO series, so it would make sense. All right, let's start talking about your journeys at ClassDojo and Speak. Both of you are proud Y Combinator alums from the last decade, kind of Paul Graham disciples. You've taken those startups into high-growth companies in this decade. As you look back, what were some things you got right in your assumptions about the opportunity, and maybe something that you were wildly off back, if you can think of demo day or the early days? Andrew, start with you.
Yeah, so one really cool thing about Speak, I think, is that we have had the same product vision since the very beginning. We did YC in winter 2017, and really the macro bet that we founded the company on was that speech models, speech recognition and synthesis models, language models, were starting to go like this in capability. It was just the beginning of that curve, and we felt like it was a very obvious future where people would be learning languages and achieving fluency not by paying humans hourly, but through these types of AI systems. And that was just an extremely obvious future. We knew it would come true. I think where we missed was that it took way longer than expected to reach our initial product market fit while trying to time that curve, if you will. So the first few years were pretty tough, and there were probably several moments where we almost quit. But I think the belief in that vision of the future and just our absolute like rock solid certainty that it would soon come true was really what kept us going. And it did come true.
And Sam, how about ClassDojo?
Yeah, well, so we got to America. We'd never lived here before, never worked in the education system. And so there were a couple of things that kind of just stood out as odd to us. So we had this enormous mission. We wanted to give every kid on earth an education they love. When we looked at the companies that were growing up at the time, very few of them had reached tens or hundreds of millions of people. And so we had this dilemma where, like, look, if we want to reach every kid on earth, we need to have a good plan to get to scale quickly. And it seemed to us that one of the better ways to scale was going to be to go straight to the people, so serving teachers and kids and parents directly. And now you remember this was around 2012, so smartphones were just becoming a thing, and people were getting used to the idea that you could just download an app and start using it. And I think in the workplace, people saw this with Slack. People just bringing Slack into work, and they started using it. And Dojo started as a communication app for teachers and kids and parents. And we started to see this thing where teachers would just install Dojo, they'd bring it into school, and then it would start to create this community around the classroom. They're sharing pictures and videos. What took us by surprise was how much it spread. So I'd been a teacher, but I hadn't realized how much teachers spread the word about things that are working for them. So it really took us by surprise. We would land in a classroom. We'd then start to expand through the school. Like one teacher would tell the next, would tell the next. It would jump to the next school. I remember because I was answering all of our support tickets that first year, but we were in like 60 countries at the end of year one. And so I think that moment in time was kind of an amazing moment where I think we got right that it made sense to serve the people directly. And that really, that we now serve like tens of millions of teachers and kids and families. The crazy thing is it's still all been word of mouth. So it's still been one person telling another, which has been kind of amazing. I think the thing that we got wrong is basically almost like the flip side of that. I think your strengths are often also your weaknesses. 4 or 5 years ago, we started to get so much inbound from schools and districts. Partly through the pandemic, everyone realized you needed to stay in touch and communicate with one another. And so we had one of the larger districts in the country kind of call us and say, hey, we need to talk about this Dojo thing. And I thought we were in trouble. So we get on the phone, and they're like, look, half our schools use this thing. We don't really know what it is, but like, can we get more of it for the other schools? And we didn't have anything to offer. So I think for a long time, we kind of had this miss of like not working very closely with schools and districts. That led very quickly to us building Dojo for Districts, which is kind of our district offering. And that's been the last year or two has been an attempt to course correct that. And I think we're in a good place now, but we really let that go for like quite a long time.
And so, Andrew and Sam, Sam over a decade, Andrew almost a decade. You guys have seen now multiple waves, early to mobile, then COVID, and now kind of AI. As you look back during that journey, was there a defining moment or decision you had as an executive team that you felt that you really nailed and provided kind of a strong inflection point for the business? And I ask this because I think in the short term, it's harder to take a step back, but after you see multiple external waves, it gives you guys a really kind of privileged position to look back and see how some big decisions came to be. So, Andrew.
Yeah, so probably the defining moment where we made a big company decision, I wouldn't call it a pivot, it was more of like a relaunch, is choosing South Korea, teaching English in South Korea as our market to relaunch. We really rebuilt the entire app. This was through 2018, 2019. We redesigned the entire experience through all the product and market learnings that were sort of hard won over the past few years. And I'm not Korean, by the way. It's like that was a crazy thing to do. And we were running the company from San Francisco in this completely foreign market. And the logic was that Korea as a country, and really Asia in general, is extremely obsessed with learning English. It's a huge cultural thing, and it's all human-based, largely. So human tutors, academies, classes, and so on. And we felt like, in some ways, this is the hardest market, right? It's the most competitive. And if we can build something that is AI-based, that feels categorically new and different, then we could win the market and then win everywhere else. So yeah, that was probably the pivotal moment.
How about Dojo's pivotal moment?
Yeah, well, there have been a few, but I'll pick one. So it sounds like similar to you, Andrew. We had excuse me. We had like basically a very high-level plan from the start that has kind of remained the same. So because the mission is to give every kid an education they love, a big part of that is how do you reach every kid on the planet? You know, we're serious about that. There's about 1.8 billion kids under 13 on the planet. We want to reach all of them. We're a fraction of the way there today. It's a great start, but it's still just a start. So the question was, well, how do you grow? How do you spread? And we kind of stumbled into this, if I'm being honest. So we were in a fifth grade classroom in San Francisco. There was a science teacher. Her name was Jenna. And we were doing this like customer interview with her, seeing how she used Dojo in the classroom. This is years and years ago. And we thought she was a great teacher. A few months later, she applies to join Dojo. She's leaving the classroom. And we're like, oh, yeah, we were like 7 or 8 people at the time. And we're like, what? Yeah, come and do an internship. Like, we don't really know what to do with you, but come do an internship. And so she joined, and over the summer, she did this kind of covert data science project where she started to show us how Dojo was building communities in schools. So she was able to show us that we'd get one really excited, passionate teacher in a school who would then start to tell all their friends about it, and then how that teacher would tell someone else in another school, another district. And so we kind of stumbled into this idea that, hold on, community is a really important thing at a school level, but also across teachers. And so that kind of gave us the beginnings of some insights that we could use to grow Dojo. Now, it's a community of millions of teachers and tens of millions of kids and families now, but that learning about community, like a year or two into the company, has really been just like one of the pillars for how Dojo has grown.
I mean, it's easy today to talk to folks and maybe they look at Speak and Dojo and think of it as somewhat of an overnight success, but I think it's important to look back and see the hours and time you all put in to build this business to get to where it is today. The journeys are both incredible. Now, the past 2 to 3 years, basically since the launch of GPT, has probably also felt like a decade in many ways for how fast things are moving. And so I want to kind of get a front lines perspective, both from customers and users, from you both, on how behavior has been changing, and frankly, what you all are doing within your own product roadmaps to adapt to this behavior change. Andrew, let's start with Speak users.
Yeah, I mean, it's been crazy, right? So for context, Speak in South Korea, as I just mentioned, it really started as a sort of supplemental speaking tool where we would get the user to just repeat a bunch of things, do a bunch of drills, and use speech recognition to provide them feedback. It was more of this scoped practice tool on the side. And then in 2022, LLMs came out, right? It was the whole ChatGPT moment. And we started, OpenAI actually led our Series B. So we started integrating a lot of these LLMs and building these new product experiences like AI lessons and role plays that we had been dreaming of this entire time. And we were really early on that curve. And I don't know if you all remember, but initially there was so much sort of like fear, uncertainty, doubt around hallucination and like inappropriate use of these models. It has felt like a decade since then. And now these types of systems are well understood, right? They're table stakes. The moderation behaviors and how things get flagged and so on are just totally, totally different. And I feel like the world kind of has now expects these types of features in almost every single tech product out there. So it's just been like a huge change in norms. I think it's allowed us to build major parts of the vision that were just not possible before. You had to hire a human, but now you can, use these models to have immersive role-play conversations, to understand what about Spanish or whatever language that you're learning. So it's pretty amazing.
And that's a consumer perspective, and in individual learners, at Dojo, you have to think about classrooms, ramifications, students taking things home back to their parents. How has kind of the last couple years played out, and how has that impacted plans for the future?
Yeah, well, we deal with younger kids, right? So it's mostly kids under 13, and teachers and all that. So it's a very privileged and kind of, it's an important place to be, and you have to be very thoughtful about how you do it. So one of the things that we realized early was that, and I think I said this here a couple of years ago when your co-founder was here, we were talking about how the problems haven't changed. Like teachers, kids, families still have a whole set of problems that they face, but what's different now is we've got, I think honestly, the most powerful technology ever invented to help people learn and grow, to help solve those problems. And so, for example, with teachers, we talk to a lot of teachers, and we hear the same, it's been the same set of problems over the years. There's been like, hey, look, I keep planning all these lessons, I'm trying to personalize learning for all my kids, I have to design individual differentiated interventions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a huge amount of admin work, as anyone who's spent time in a classroom knows. And it's kind of crazy to me that we ask teachers to spend, literally a day or two, a full working day or two a week on admin work. I mean, these are people that could be amazing professionals doing amazing things with kids, but these are also problems that can be totally solved with the right kinds of co-pilots and tools. So we actually built a thing called Sidekick, which is basically a virtual teaching assistant for every teacher. And it takes away many of these tasks, massively reduces the admin work, and we are giving it to every teacher on Dojo for free. The other side of it is with younger kids, right? So one of the big jobs that you have to do as a kid is learn to read. It's the gateway to everything else you want to do in your life. And for a lot of reasons, it's not been taught in super great ways in a bunch of schools around the world. But it turns out the science is really good. Like there's good research on how you can teach reading effectively. And so we are able to take some of that science and work with some of the foundational models. This product's coming out soon. It's out in the early test groups this quarter. But it's an AI reading tutor, which can teach a kid from nothing to phonics, like full fluency in phonics in 3 or 4 months. And that's just never been possible before in the history of the world. Like a few people had that, and now every kid on the planet can have a reading tutor which teaches them to read. And think of the difference that makes in the world.
You both have kind of touched on, in a post-AI world, things have gotten easier, at least from a development perspective. You can spin up an application over the weekend. There are a lot of accessible tools. There's now MCP to shift data across models and different infrastructure you can leverage. You all were building in a pre-AI world and have built, real enterprise value in both of your companies. For founders today who are going into EdTech, how would you think about kind of the build versus buy in building a tech company? Because I think there are a lot of easy buttons you can press to get an MVP or a product out to market, but at the end of the day, owning your end user, your end customer is what has made both of you really successful. So any advice in kind of this new age of company building, that you would offer?
So I would say that now more than ever, the fundamentals matter. It is so critically important to just very, very deeply understand the problem that you're solving and build a specialized vertical solution, right? This is speak for language learning. And AI and engineering in general, writing code, is a means to an end. It's a tool, right? I think it's really dangerous to go chasing after shiny objects, and then you start building something people don't actually want, right? It's like, again, the YC fundamental tagline, make something people want. That is even more important now than ever.
Sam, do you agree with that?
100% echo that. I think if I had to contribute something else, I'd say distribution really matters. I think if you're a technology company, right? Like if we wanted to reach 50 kids, we would have started a school. But I think distribution really matters, and I think it's still so important to figure out how you are going to grow. Now, the good news is there's network effects and all that kind of thing, but the good news is the other way to grow is you make dramatically better experiences. Like ChatGPT just caught everyone's imagination because it was just a magical experience. And we're in a world now where you can create truly 100 or 1,000x better experiences. And so I think it's very exciting to be building products right now.
All right,
I have a quick follow-up to that, actually. So I do think one interesting paradox that has been on my mind is that, on one hand, the pace of AI in all of these systems has been so blistering, right? So fast over the past 2 years. And on the other hand, you can make a credible argument that the world hasn't changed that much since GPT-4 came out. There's a ton of real-world inertia. So I think for a lot of builders and founders, there's so much AI anxiety and what if ChatGPT eats this thing, or what if Anthropic does, Y? And I really strongly believe that the world doesn't change unless we all do it and build it. And that's something that I just feel like a lot of founders miss.
Really great feedback. All right, get out the crystal ball. There's a lot of doom and gloom around AI and where things could end up in education and learning. Let's flip it. Let's get optimistic and bold. We wake up in 2030. What's one thing that you believe will happen in kind of the education and learning industry? Fire away, Sam.
Cool. Maybe this is a very obvious one, but look, I really do believe we're at the most exciting time in the history of building technology products, to help people learn. It's the best technology ever. So very obvious one, I think, is pretty soon we're going to have a world where every kid on Earth can have a personal tutor that helps them learn and grow. And we solve, the Bloom's 2 sigma observation. We actually have a way to solve that now at a very large scale. There's many companies doing it, I'm sure, but that seems very near term to me.
Andrew, did Sam steal your answer?
I was going to say pretty much the same thing, but maybe at a more micro level. I think that language fluency will become a fully solved problem within 5 years.
Andrew, Sam, thank you so much for doing this. It was an absolute pleasure.
Cheers, Ben.
Thank you, everyone.